There are places where stories just seem to gather. Not cities, not roads, but the spaces just beyond them. The edge of a forest where the trees close ranks. A moorland track that fades into mist. Or a border road lightly used where signs change but the land does not. These are the places where beasts and boogeymen tend to linger. Not because something is always there, but because these landscapes resist certainty. They are hard to see across, hard to map completely, and hard to feel in control of. Across history, monster stories don't appear evenly. They cluster. They return to the same valleys, the same forests, the same forgotten margins, long after the original animals or the original dangers have gone. If these stories were only inventions, they wouldn't keep choosing the same ground. When you start mapping these accounts, a pattern always emerges. Monsters don't appear everywhere. They don't distribute themselves evenly across the world. Instead, they gather. The same forests, the same valleys, the same stretches of road, Bray Road, and wilderness margins, sometimes for decades, sometimes for centuries. The first of these places is the edge of wilderness. Not the deep interior, but the boundary where human control begins to thin out. The forest margins, jungle edges, scrubland that pushes up against the camps, farms and rail lines. Ecologically, these edges matter. Predators patrol them, prey gathers there, and visibility breaks down. For humans, they're unsettling for the same reason. You're close enough to feel safe, but not far enough to feel dominant. One of the clear historical examples comes from Savo. Here, lions began attacking railway workers camped along the boundary between settlement and scrub. What mattered wasn't just the animals themselves, but the geography. The temporary camps with limited defences, men sleeping at the edge of known territory. The idea of the man-eater grew not out of myth, but out of proximity, and the fear became rooted in that place. Some landscapes don't just sit at the edge of wilderness, they sit at the edge of authority. Borderlands, frontier forests, mountain ranges that stretch across state or national lines. These are places where the land is continuous, but our human systems aren't. One of the most familiar modern examples would be Bigfoot. Sightings cluster heavily in the Pacific Northwest, this vast system of temperate rainforest that crosses borders effortlessly, stretching across Washington, Oregon and British Columbia. Dense cover, broken sightlines and enormous tracts of roadless land. Here something large can move without being easily contextualised, especially at distance, in poor light or under stress. The creature doesn't respect borders, but the stories do. And in regions shaped by frontier history, incomplete maps and a cultural memory of the unknown, that ambiguity is given room to survive. It's a landscape that allows uncertainty, which is why it continues to generate sightings rather than resolve them. Some beasts don't linger at the edge of wilderness at all. They linger in places we've left behind. The disused estates, quarries, military land, all forgotten infrastructure. These are landscapes where nature returns unevenly and memory fills in the gaps. In Britain, Dartmoor is a really good example. It's a place with restricted areas, limited access, and a long history of stories layered over real animal presence. Big cat sightings persist here not because answers are obvious, but because they aren't. The land doesn't offer clean sightlines or easy explanations. When a place feels half remembered, the stories that grow there often are too. And then finally, there are places where fear is shaped by loss, conflict. The grazing land, plantations, expanding settlements. These are landscapes where people and predators are pushed into close contact, often unwillingly. Livestock disappears. Animals are glimpsed briefly, but stories harden quickly. In these zones, predators are rarely seen as animals under pressure. They become villains. Over time, behaviour becomes narrative, and then narrative becomes legend. The monster doesn't emerge from imagination alone, but from repeated tension between survival that needs that don't align. Across all of these places, the pattern holds. Poor visibility, stress, expectation, and memory reshaped by fear. When something strange happens in these environments, the landscape doesn't contradict the story, it supports it. What these places have in common isn't superstition, it's uncertainty, broken sightlines, fragmented authority, land that doesn't behave the way we expect it to. In wilderness edges, the borderlands, abandoned spaces and conflict zones, the world feels slightly unfinished, as if something hasn't been fully explained yet. And when people encounter something strange there, an out-of-place animal, a movement they can't quite identify, or a sound they don't recognise, the landscape gives the story room to grow. That doesn't mean the stories are finished, or that the witnesses are unreliable. It means these places remind us of something uncomfortable, that we don't see everything, that we never have, and that nature doesn't organise itself for our convenience. In my own fiction, I often return to these environments, forests across borders, regions where jurisdiction ends, certainly before certainty does, and not because monsters are waiting there, but because something unknown is allowed to remain. And as long as those places exist, beasts and boogeymen will all continue to find somewhere to linger. If you enjoy this kind of quiet sort of research aspect of storytelling, you might like the longer essays and fiction I write elsewhere. Do go and check out Black Beast Books on Amazon and on social media. Thank you for listening.